The afternoon was calm and quiet, the kind of day that felt ordinary to most people. The sun was still high in the sky, not too hot and not too cold, and a soft breeze moved through the street. Cars passed by slowly, and the sounds of distant traffic mixed with the voices of people going about their day. For many, it was just another normal afternoon, nothing special, nothing worth remembering. But for one young black boy, this simple afternoon was about to become something he would never forget. The boy stood near a small public area close to his school, holding his backpack tightly against his chest. He was around 10 years old, small for his age, with curious eyes that watched everything around him. School had ended a little earlier that day, and his father had told him to wait there until he arrived to pick him up. The boy trusted his father completely, so he followed his instructions without question. He had waited like this before, and nothing bad had ever happened. Around him, people moved in different directions. Some were walking home, others were talking on their phones, and a few sat nearby on benches, lost in their own thoughts. No one paid much attention to the boy at first. He was just another child waiting for a parent, blending into the everyday scene. The boy didn't feel scared, but he did feel alert. His father had always taught him to be aware of his surroundings and to stay calm no matter what happened. A police car was parked not far away, its blue and white color standing out against the street. The boy noticed it but didn't think much of it. Police cars were a common sight in the area, and he had grown used to seeing officers around. To him, they were just part of the city, like traffic lights and street signs. He believed police officers were there to help people, and he had never had a reason to think otherwise. As minutes passed, the boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked down the street, hoping to see his father's familiar walk or his car turning the corner. He checked his watch again, wondering if his father had been delayed. Still, he stayed patient. His father was someone who kept his promises, and the boy believed he would arrive soon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground, and the street felt slower now. A few people glanced at the boy briefly, then looked away. To them, he was invisible, just part of the background. The boy didn't mind. He was used to waiting quietly. He thought about school, about a story his teacher had told earlier that day, and about what he might eat for dinner. What the boy didn't realize was that, to someone else, his presence looked different. From a distance, a police officer had noticed him standing alone. The officer watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. To the officer, the scene didn't look as harmless as it truly was. A young boy standing alone in a public place raised questions in his mind. He decided to approach, believing he was simply doing his job. The boy noticed the officer walking toward him. He straightened his posture, just like his father had taught him. He told himself to stay calm and respectful. He had nothing to hide, and he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Still, there was a small feeling of nervousness in his chest. Adults in uniforms could be intimidating, especially when they walked toward you with serious faces. Around them, life continued as usual. Cars drove past, people talked, and the afternoon remained peaceful on the surface. No one could tell that this simple moment was slowly turning into something much bigger. The boy stood quietly, unaware that this ordinary afternoon was about to test his confidence, his pride, and his belief in being treated fairly. At that moment, everything still seemed normal. There were no raised voices, no crowd, and no signs of conflict. Just a boy waiting for his father and an officer approaching with questions. It was the kind of situation that happens every day in many places, often unnoticed and forgotten. But this time, it would not end quietly. The ordinary afternoon, filled with simple sounds and familiar sights, was about to change. What started as a peaceful wait would soon become a moment that revealed deeper truths about judgment, assumptions, and the power of words. And though the boy did not yet know it, this was the beginning of a story that would leave a lasting impact on everyone involved. The police officer stopped a few steps away from the boy and looked him up and down. His boots were heavy, his uniform neat, and his face showed a serious expression that made the boy feel smaller than he already was. The officer crossed his arms for a moment, then spoke in a firm voice, asking the boy why he was standing there alone. The question sounded simple, but the tone made it feel like something was wrong. The boy swallowed and answered politely. He said he was waiting for his father to come and pick him up. He tried to sound confident, just like his father had taught him, but his voice was still soft. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied. He asked more questions, one after another, about where the boy lived, why he wasn't with friends, and how long he had been standing there. Each question felt heavier than the last. The boy shifted his backpack on his shoulders and answered honestly. He explained that school had ended early and his father told him to wait right there. He pointed down the street and said his dad would arrive soon. The boy thought that would be enough, that the officer would nod and walk away. Instead, the officer leaned slightly closer, his eyes sharp and doubtful. The officer asked about the boy's father, wanting to know what kind of work he did. The boy felt a small spark of pride rise inside him. He always admired his father and loved talking about him. Without hesitation, he said his dad worked in special forces. He said it simply, like it was the most normal thing in the world, because to him, it was. For a brief second, there was silence. Then the officer let out a short laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to sting. The officer shook his head slowly, a smirk forming on his face. He repeated the boy's words in a mocking tone, as if testing how ridiculous they sounded. The boy felt his cheeks grow warm. He knew he was telling the truth, yet suddenly it felt like no one believed him. The officer continued questioning him, this time with a playful but sharp edge. He asked if the boy knew what special forces really meant, hinting that it sounded too big and too important to be true. The boy nodded and said he did. He had heard stories, seen medals, and watched his father leave quietly in the early mornings. He knew his dad didn't talk much about his work, but that didn't make it any less real. People nearby began to notice what was happening. A woman walking her dog slowed her steps. A man sitting on a bench glanced over and frowned. The officer didn't seem to notice them. His focus stayed on the boy, who now stood very still, trying to stay calm. The boy remembered his father's words, never argue, never raise your voice, and always speak with respect. Even though the officer's words felt unfair, the boy didn't cry or shout. He held on to his truth quietly. He repeated that his father was coming and that he would explain everything. The officer sighed, clearly unconvinced. He looked down the street, then back at the boy, as if waiting for a lie to fall apart. The air felt heavier now. What started as simple questions had turned into something uncomfortable. The boy could feel eyes on him, and for the first time, he felt exposed. He wondered why he had to prove anything at all. He wondered if things would be different if he were older, or if he looked different. These thoughts confused him, but he pushed them away. The officer took a step back and checked his watch, almost impatiently. He said they would wait and see if this father actually showed up. The word sounded like a challenge. The boy nodded quietly. Inside, his heart beat faster, but his belief in his father stayed strong. He knew his dad would come. He always did. As they stood there, time seemed to slow down. Every sound felt louder, every movement more important. The boy looked down the street again, hoping for a familiar figure to appear. This moment, filled with doubt and quiet tension, was no longer just about waiting. It had become a test of truth, patience, and dignity, and the boy stood ready, even if he didn't fully understand why he had to. The boy lifted his head slightly when the officer asked again about his father. This time, the question sounded sharper, almost like a challenge. The boy took a small breath and answered clearly, saying his dad was in special forces. He didn't say it to impress anyone. He said it because it was true, and because he felt proud. His father was his hero, someone strong, calm, and always honest. For a brief moment, the officer stared at him as if waiting for more. Then a smile slowly spread across the officer's face, but it was not a kind one. It was the kind of smile that carried doubt and disbelief. The officer let out a short laugh and shook his head. He repeated the boy's words, stretching them out like a joke. The sound of that laugh hit the boy harder than he expected. The boy felt his stomach tighten. He had spoken with confidence, but now he wondered if he had said something wrong. He looked around for support, but the people nearby were strangers. Some glanced over, others looked away. No one stepped forward. The boy suddenly felt very small, standing there with his backpack and his quiet truth. The officer bent slightly forward and asked the boy if he even knew what special forces meant. His tone was mocking, as if he expected the boy to stumble over the answer. The boy nodded and explained in simple words. He said his father trained a lot, traveled often, and helped protect people. He didn't use fancy terms. He spoke from memory, from moments at home, from stories overheard late at night. The officer listened, but his expression didn't change. Instead, he laughed again, louder this time. He said kids often made up stories, especially when they wanted to sound important. The words felt heavy. The boy's ears burned, and his hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. He wanted to say more, to defend his father, but he remembered what his dad had taught him. Stay calm. Speak only the truth. So the boy repeated himself, slower this time. He said his father was coming and would explain everything. His voice didn't shake, but inside, his heart was racing. He felt embarrassed, not because he had lied, but because he was being treated like he had. The officer's mocking tone made the truth feel invisible. A few people nearby started paying closer attention. A couple walking past slowed down. A man across the street crossed his arms and watched. The boy noticed them but didn't look directly at anyone. He kept his eyes on the officer, even though every second felt uncomfortable. He wondered why saying something good about his father had turned into this moment. The officer continued making small comments, not outright insults, but enough to hurt. He spoke about how special forces were rare and how unlikely it was that a man like the boy's father existed. The boy didn't understand what he meant by that. He didn't know why his father seemed impossible to believe. To him, his dad was very real. He packed lunches, fixed broken things, and hugged him goodnight. The boy's thoughts drifted to memories of his father leaving early in the morning, quiet and focused. He remembered the medals tucked away, never displayed. He remembered being told not to talk too much about his dad's work, not because it was fake, but because it was serious. These memories gave him strength. They reminded him that truth didn't need approval. The officer finally stopped laughing and looked down the street again. He said they would see if this special forces dad actually showed up. The way he said it made it sound like a joke waiting for a punchline. The boy nodded again. He had nothing else to say. He had told the truth, and now all he could do was wait. The air felt thick with tension. The boy stood still, holding on to his belief like a shield. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. Even if no one else believed him, he believed in his father. And that belief was stronger than the officer's laughter, stronger than the stares, and stronger than the doubt hanging in the air. The officer's laughter did not fade quickly. Instead, it lingered in the air, sharp and uncomfortable, like a sound that refused to disappear. He shook his head again, this time louder, making sure the boy noticed. His shoulders relaxed as if the situation amused him. To the officer, it no longer felt like a routine check. It felt like entertainment. He looked around briefly, as if checking whether anyone else was listening, then glanced back at the boy with a half-smile. He asked if the boy really expected him to believe such a story. His voice carried a mocking tone, stretched and playful, but there was nothing playful about how it made the boy feel. Each word landed like a small push, forcing the boy further into embarrassment. The boy stood frozen. He could feel heat rise to his face, and his ears burned. He wanted to disappear, to become invisible like he had been before the officer arrived. He lowered his eyes for a moment, staring at the ground, then lifted them again. He did not want the officer to think he was ashamed of his father. Even if his voice stayed quiet, his pride did not fade. The officer chuckled again and repeated the phrase, "Special Forces," as if tasting the words. He said it slowly, dramatically, then laughed once more. He told the boy that people said many things when they were scared or confused. He hinted that maybe the boy had watched too many movies. The words were not shouted, but they were sharp enough to hurt. A few people nearby had now fully noticed what was happening. Some slowed their steps. Others stopped completely. A woman frowned and whispered something to the person next to her. The boy could feel their eyes on him, and it made his chest feel tight. Being laughed at by one person was bad enough. Being laughed at in front of strangers felt much worse. The officer continued, making small jokes, each one sounding harmless on its own, but together they formed something cruel. He asked the boy if his father was also a superhero. He smirked after saying it, clearly pleased with himself. The boy's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. He remembered his father's calm voice, reminding him never to lose control, no matter how unfair things felt. So the boy stayed quiet. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply said again that his father was coming. The officer rolled his eyes slightly, as if tired of hearing the same answer. He told the boy that lying only made things worse. That word, lying, cut deep. The boy's throat tightened, but he forced himself to breathe. Inside, confusion swirled. The boy did not understand why the truth sounded like a lie to this man. He did not understand why pride had turned into shame so quickly. He wondered if saying nothing at all would have been better. But then he thought of his father, and he knew staying silent would feel like betrayal. The officer leaned back and crossed his arms, clearly enjoying his position of power. He spoke louder now, enough for others to hear. He said that kids should be careful about making up stories, especially about serious jobs. His voice carried a tone of warning, but also amusement. The boy felt smaller with every word. Some bystanders shifted uncomfortably. A man shook his head slightly. Another person looked as if they wanted to say something but didn't. The boy noticed these reactions but felt alone all the same. No one stepped in. No one told the officer to stop. The laughter and mocking continued, filling the space where kindness should have been. Time seemed to slow. Each second felt heavy. The boy's confidence was being tested in ways he had never experienced before. Yet, even as the officer mocked him, the boy held on to one thing. He knew who his father was. He knew the truth did not change just because someone laughed at it. The officer finally paused, looking down the street again, still wearing that doubtful smile. He said they would wait and see what happened next. The mockery had done its damage, but the story was not over. The boy stood there, quiet and steady, knowing deep inside that the laughter would soon fade, and the truth would speak for itself. The space around them began to feel different, heavier than before. What had started as quiet laughter and mocking now pulled attention from all directions. People who were walking past slowed down without meaning to. Some stopped completely. The small moment between a police officer and a young boy had grown into something public, something uncomfortable. The air carried tension that no one could ignore. The boy could feel it first. He noticed the silence between sounds, the way conversations nearby lowered, the way footsteps paused. He sensed eyes on him, judging, wondering. His heart beat faster, not because he was guilty, but because he felt exposed. He hugged his backpack closer, as if it could protect him from the weight of the moment. The officer shifted his stance, clearly aware now that others were watching. But instead of softening, his posture became firmer. He stood taller, chest out, as if reminding everyone of his authority. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it. He asked the boy again to stay where he was and wait. The word sounded like an order, not a request. The boy nodded. He did not argue. He did not move. Inside, his thoughts raced. He wondered why this was happening. He had done everything right. He waited where his father told him. He answered honestly. Still, the situation kept growing. He felt confused and unfairly judged, but he kept his face steady. Nearby, a woman folded her arms and watched closely. A man across the street shook his head slowly, clearly uneasy. Some people exchanged looks but said nothing. The tension was shared, but silence ruled. Everyone felt that something was wrong, yet no one stepped forward. The boy noticed this and felt a deep loneliness settle in his chest. The officer glanced around again, then back at the boy. He checked his watch, tapping it lightly as if time itself was against the boy's story. He made a quiet comment about how long they had already waited. It sounded like another test, another way to prove doubt. The boy resisted the urge to explain again. He had said everything he could say. The street felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. Sound seemed sharper, louder. A car horn in the distance made the boy flinch slightly. His palms were sweaty, but he kept them still at his sides. He remembered his father's words about staying calm under pressure. That memory helped him breathe. The officer's mocking had slowed, but his doubt remained strong. He no longer laughed, but his disbelief showed in his eyes. He spoke less, but when he did, his words were cold and careful. He said they would keep waiting. The boy wondered how long waiting could last, and what would happen if his father was late. As the seconds passed, the boy felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Part of him wanted to cry, to run, to escape the staring faces and heavy silence. Another part of him stood firm. He knew his father. He trusted him completely. That trust became his anchor, holding him steady when everything else felt uncertain. People continued to gather, some pretending not to stare, others openly watching. Whispers moved through the crowd like a quiet wind. The boy caught fragments of words but not full sentences. He did not want to hear them anyway. He kept his eyes forward, focused down the street where his father would come from. The officer adjusted his belt and took a step back, giving the boy space but not freedom. It felt like a line had been drawn. Everyone was waiting now, not just for a man to arrive, but for the truth to reveal itself. The tension hung thick, stretching the moment longer than it should have been. The boy took a deep breath and held it for a second, then let it out slowly. Whatever happened next was out of his control. He had done nothing wrong. He had spoken the truth. Now all he could do was stand there and wait, surrounded by doubt, silence, and rising tension, knowing that everything was about to change. A quiet shift happened before anyone even spoke. The boy noticed it first, not because he saw something clearly, but because the feeling in the air changed. The tension that had been building suddenly paused, like a held breath. Down the street, a tall figure appeared, walking calmly toward the growing crowd. His steps were steady, unhurried, and confident, the kind of walk that came from discipline and purpose. The man wore simple clothes, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. No uniform, no medals on display. Just a calm presence that felt strong without trying to be. As he moved closer, a few people turned their heads. Some straightened their posture without realizing why. Even before he reached them, his presence seemed to command quiet respect. The boy's heart jumped the moment he recognized him. He knew that walk. He knew the way his father carried himself, alert yet relaxed, aware of everything around him. Relief rushed through the boy so quickly that his eyes burned. He wanted to call out, but he stayed still, remembering everything he had been taught. The officer noticed the man too. At first, he only glanced briefly, still unsure. But as the man came closer, the officer's expression shifted. His shoulders tightened slightly, and his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. Something about the man made him pay attention. The father stopped a few steps away and looked calmly between the officer and his son. His eyes softened when they landed on the boy. There was no panic on his face, no anger, just quiet concern. He asked in a steady voice what was going on. The question was simple, but it carried weight. The boy looked up at his father, feeling safe again. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't need to. The officer answered first, explaining the situation in short, careful sentences. His tone had changed. The mockery was gone. In its place was formality. He mentioned the boy's claim, repeating the words, "Special Forces," without laughter this time. The father listened without interrupting. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes were sharp and attentive. When the officer finished speaking, the father nodded once. He placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, grounding him. Then he calmly confirmed who he was and what he did. There was no bragging. No long explanation. Just facts, spoken clearly and confidently. The effect was immediate. The officer's stance shifted again. His confidence faded slightly as realization settled in. The crowd grew quiet. Whispers stopped. Faces changed from curiosity to surprise. The father reached into his pocket and showed identification when asked. He did it smoothly, like someone used to protocols and verification. The officer studied it carefully, then looked back up, his expression serious now. The laughter from earlier felt distant and out of place, as if it belonged to another moment entirely. The boy watched everything silently. He felt something warm rise inside him, not pride, but validation. He had told the truth. He always had. Seeing his father stand there calmly, proving nothing more than what already was, made the boy stand a little taller. People around them shifted again, some looking uncomfortable, others impressed. A few avoided eye contact with the officer. The power in the moment had changed direction. The father didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply stood there, present and composed, letting the truth speak on its own. The officer cleared his throat and nodded slowly. His tone softened when he addressed the boy again. The authority was still there, but now it carried restraint and respect. The father thanked him calmly, his hand still resting protectively on his son's shoulder. The street felt lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted. The tension that once filled the space slowly dissolved. What had been doubt turned into silence, and silence into understanding. The arrival of one man had changed everything, not through force or anger, but through quiet strength and undeniable truth. The moment the officer fully understood who was standing in front of him, the atmosphere shifted in a way that could not be ignored. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was powerful. The confidence that had once filled his posture slowly drained away, replaced by a careful stiffness. His eyes moved from the identification back to the man's face, then briefly to the boy, as if connecting pieces that should have been obvious from the start. The father stood calmly, saying nothing more than necessary. He did not repeat his role or explain its importance. He simply was who he said he was. His silence carried more weight than any argument ever could. Years of discipline showed in the way he stood, balanced and alert, yet completely in control of himself. He was not there to prove anything. The truth had already done that for him. The officer handed back the identification with a slower movement than before. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter and more formal. He addressed the father with respect, no trace of mockery left. The tone that once carried doubt now carried caution. It was clear that he realized his mistake, even if he had not yet said it out loud. The boy watched closely, taking in every detail. He noticed how the officer no longer laughed, how his words were chosen carefully now. A sense of relief washed over the boy, but it was mixed with something else, something deeper. It was the feeling of being seen, finally understood after being doubted for so long. The father gently squeezed his son's shoulder, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It told the boy that everything was okay now. It told him that he had done nothing wrong. The boy's shoulders relaxed for the first time since the questioning began. His breathing slowed, and the tight knot in his chest began to loosen. Around them, the crowd reacted in quiet ways. Some people exchanged looks of realization. Others looked down, uncomfortable with what they had witnessed earlier. A few nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the father's calm strength. No one spoke loudly. The lesson unfolding felt too serious for noise. The officer cleared his throat again, this time offering a brief apology. It was not dramatic, but it was real. He admitted that he should not have dismissed the boy so quickly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The boy listened carefully, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. The father accepted the apology with a calm nod. He did not lecture. He did not express anger. Instead, he spoke quietly about respect and the importance of listening, especially to children. His words were steady, not accusing, but firm enough to be understood. The officer listened, truly listened this time. The boy felt proud, not because his father had proven his job, but because of how he handled the situation. There was strength in restraint, power in calmness. The boy realized that true authority did not come from mocking others, but from understanding and fairness. The tension that had once filled the street was now replaced by reflection. The officer stepped back, giving the boy space. The crowd slowly began to move again, life returning to normal. But the moment lingered in the air, leaving a mark on everyone who had seen it. The father looked down at his son and smiled softly. They exchanged a quiet look, one filled with trust and understanding. No words were needed. Together, they turned and walked away, leaving behind a scene that had transformed from doubt to truth. As they moved down the street, the boy felt taller, stronger. He had learned something important that day. Truth may be questioned, mocked, or doubted, but it does not disappear. And sometimes, it arrives quietly, walking onto the scene, changing everything without raising its voice. The street slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the moment that had just passed refused to fade so easily. People began walking again, cars moved forward, and conversations picked up, yet something had changed. What happened between the officer, the boy, and his father stayed in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. It was the kind of moment that followed people home, replaying itself in quiet thoughts. The officer stood still for a few seconds after the father and son walked away. His posture was no longer firm or proud. It was thoughtful. He looked down the street where they disappeared, then glanced around at the bystanders who had seen everything. There was no applause, no words of judgment, but the silence spoke clearly. He knew he would remember this encounter for a long time. The boy walked beside his father, feeling lighter with every step. The fear and tension he had felt earlier slowly melted away. His father's presence was steady and reassuring. They didn't talk right away. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence carried more comfort than words. The boy looked up at his father, then ahead, feeling safe again. After a few moments, the father spoke softly. He told his son he had handled everything well. He praised him for staying calm, for telling the truth, and for not losing his temper even when it was hard. Those words meant more to the boy than anything else. He felt proud, not because he had been proven right, but because he had stayed true to himself. The boy asked a quiet question, wondering why the officer didn't believe him in the first place. The father paused before answering. He explained gently that sometimes people judge too quickly. Sometimes they let their assumptions speak louder than facts. He told his son that this was wrong, but it happened, and it was important to respond with patience and dignity. The lesson settled deep in the boy's heart. He realized that respect was not something you demanded loudly. It was something you carried within you, even when others failed to show it. He understood now that his father's strength was not just in his job, but in how he treated others, even in difficult moments. Behind them, the officer eventually returned to his duties. But he was not the same. The laughter and mockery from earlier felt distant and embarrassing. He replayed the boy's calm voice in his mind, the father's composed response, and his own behavior. It was a moment of reflection he could not escape, a reminder that authority came with responsibility. The bystanders carried their own thoughts as well. Some felt regret for not speaking up. Others felt inspired by how quietly the situation had been resolved. A few told the story later, not as gossip, but as a lesson. A lesson about listening, humility, and the danger of underestimating someone based on appearance or age. As the boy and his father reached their car, the father placed a hand on his son's shoulder once more. He told him that the world would not always be fair, but his character would always matter. The boy nodded, holding on to those words like a promise. That ordinary afternoon, which began with waiting and confusion, ended with understanding and growth. It became a moment that shaped the boy's view of the world and reminded others of a simple truth. Respect should come before judgment. Truth does not need to shout. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons are taught not through anger or force, but through calm strength and quiet dignity. The scene faded, but its message remained, living on in the hearts of those who witnessed it, and especially in a young boy who learned that day that standing calmly in the truth is one of the strongest things a person can do.